And we should be live. Let me just double check. I like to double check on my phone because I don't trust any of the software. It's loading so far on my phone. Okay, yeah, now we're live.
Cool.
Let me just turn off my volume. This always happens. Okay, so let's get the party started, as I always say. And I would like to say to everybody, hello, planet Earth, and welcome to my weekly Wednesdays, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Lilia. I work for Facialteam, and my pronouns are she and hers. I'm the creator of Facialteam's 3,000 plus strong Facebook peer group founded 8 years ago, and I've been an ally to the community since 2008. So I've always felt a little bit like a patient advocate, and I'm keenly aware that researching gender identity services nowadays is often overwhelming. So that's why we're doing these live streams. They are a way to communicate important information to you, our followers, and we're hoping that they become a beacon of inspiration on all topics trans-related. So today I am very, very honored to welcome with me today two guests from two continents as usual. Juno Roche, who's an author from the UK.
Juno Roche is fine. Roche sounds very French and very posh, but actually I'm from South London, so Roche is fine.
I wasn't sure. I meant to ask you that before. Roche or Roche?
That's okay. But you said it beautifully, so thank you.
Thank you. And Polly Schattel from the US. Did I pronounce it?
Schattel.
Schattel.
Schattel. I will tell you how to pronounce my name, Schattel.
Thank you very much, both of you, for coming with me today.
Pleasure.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
So to start off, both of you live in the mountains just as I do. And I understand you've both been school teachers. So there's some common ground here that I thought was very interesting. And Juno, would you mind telling us first a little bit about yourself?
Yes, although I kind of feel like nowadays that kind of like living in the mountains sort of sums me up. I feel like I'm a writer who lives in the mountains, who lives in this very, very small Spanish Andalusian mountain village, which is really just a cluster of houses, half of which are empty half of the time. And I write, and I've written 3 books so far, or I've published 3 books so far. The first was Queer Sex. I'll show you them. That's easier. Queer Sex and Trans Power, which has actually just been shortlisted for the Polari Prize, which is amazing. And Gender Explorers, which has just come out now, which again went to #1 on the audiobook chart this week for politics, which I'm really proud of, and I'm not showing off. When I started writing, I was told that no one wanted to read anything by a trans author. I literally was told that no one's going to read anything by you. So, you know, like I don't know, so I started writing the books in about 2015, I suppose. So in that time, you know, I feel like I've done a tiny bit to kind of change that perception, which is actually, no, that's not true. Trans books do sell, and people do want to, other people other than trans people as well want to read our stuff. So I'm a writer. I was born in London. I have ended up in Spain. It was a complete fluke. I'd never been to Spain before, buying this house here. The week I came to Spain was the first time I'd ever been to Spain, and in that week I bought this house and decided that I would leave London and start here. And despite everyone telling me that it was a kind of an absurd thing to do, I've never been happier, and I've never written as much as I do. So that's me.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You're so personable, so it's really a pleasure to have someone and someone who, you know, is really prominent in the community. Your books are very popular, and the Polari Prize, for those who don't know, is quite an eminent prize for upcoming authors. No?
Oh, it's a really big prize. So my first book, Queer Sex, was longlisted And and even that was like a, because I come from from South London, from a very working class family where we didn't have books in the house when I was a kid. No one talked about education. No one talked about going to university. No one talked about. So for me to write books that then get prizes or get longlisted or shortlisted for prizes is a massive deal. It's a huge. So I cannot explain to you what that means to me. And Polari is like a fabulous prize, and so for Trans Power to be shortlisted is in amongst from a long list of many brilliant books. It feels amazing. So yeah. So thank you, Polari.
Congratulations for that, Juno.
Thank you.
And Polly, can you also tell us a little bit about who you are and where you come from, what you do?
Sure. I am in the mountains of North Carolina, the Appalachians right now. Asheville is where I live, the little town of Asheville. It's a wonderful little place. I've got a national park right outside my back door, so it's really wonderful. We've got bears and turkey and deer and all kind of wild critters around here. But it also is very conducive to writing. I mean, it's actually kind of a quiet town if you want it to be. You can find the party scene, but it's a good town to get serious in and write. And it's almost like a meditative place. And so I've been very productive here. I'm primarily known as a filmmaker. And but I got kind of tired of spending years and years trying to raise money for my projects, and so I went back to my original plan A, which was to write books. Film was sort of a deviation from that, and so my first novel came out earlier this year. It's called The Occultists, and I've got a second novel that's just completed, and I've got plans for more novels. And even though I'm trans, I consider myself more a writer who is trans rather than a trans writer, if you know what I mean. I'm a novelist. I make up stories. I like fiction. I like imagination. So the best kind of stories are the stories that don't have a message or are not kind of polemical, in my opinion. So I'm just telling stories. There's no political subtext. There's probably a subtext of like tolerance and stuff, but there's very little trans content. It's just basically a story about people. That's what I do. That's my sweet spot.
Okay,
So
well,
I'm in awe of Juno and what she's accomplished, because I could never do that. I could never move the culture like she's moved it, and so I'm in awe of what she's accomplished.
Thank you. Connecting with you through this has been a complete delight. It has to be said. That's one of the kind of one of the few bonuses of this very tough time, is to connect with people that you wouldn't connect with. So it's been a complete joy to connect with you. Thank you for saying that. I honestly believe if I thought that my books were going to have the impact they would have had, I don't know that I could have written them. I mean, I think I wrote them not knowing at all that it was going to. I was just mad. I was so angry with people telling me how I could and should and would live my life, that I just started writing, and I've never really stopped. So thank you for saying that, Polly. It's a joy to hear.
as Juno was saying before we began the live stream, she was saying how much in awe she is of people who can write fiction and just make up these stories. And so
I know.
it's
I've asked Polly to send me copies. Please send me copies. I'll give you my address. We'll do a book swap.
And I will sign it to you too.
Oh, same here. I would do exactly the same to you. Thank you.
So it's lovely to have two perspectives here, that you're both authors, but in nonfiction and in fiction, and things that are very specifically trans oriented, and other things that are just creative. And so, and the idea behind doing this specific live stream was, well, it's twofold, right? So, and we want to talk about role models like yourselves, people who are doing what they want to do, what they're good at, and making a difference in the world, and also giving back to the community. So we'll hear a little bit more about what you both do aside from being authors and filmmakers and creatives. So I'd like to first focus on we'll go back and I'd like to go a little bit more into specifics into your 3 books, Juno, if you don't mind. Um, and Queer Sex, Trans Power, and the last one, it just came out, Gender Explorers.
Yeah.
So could you give us a mini review of the
Yeah.
3?
So I mean, I think I probably can, because I think I probably have done it quite a lot now. I've done lots of interviews about, you know, I've written, the 3 books were written as a trilogy. I kind of knew that I was going to write 3 books. In my head, I knew that. I don't know if my publisher knew that, but I knew that, and I knew that. So Queer Sex really came out of the fact that I was going through a journey, and every time I'd been writing articles and pieces for newspapers or magazines before, and they always wanted me to tell a kind of sad trans story. It always had to be a kind of tragic trans tale, that I was born in the wrong body, and that I'd reject that body, and it would be an awful body. And I kept thinking, I really like my body. I've always liked my body. My body's not the problem. You know, the genitals might be the problem, but I mean, my body is not the problem. This isn't a bad body. It's a body that, you know, I was diagnosed with HIV many, many, many years ago. And, you know, my body has survived that and has lived with, you know, and is kind of, with the help of fantastic drugs, has kind of lived with that. And so I didn't want to demonize my body. And so I wrote Queer Sex because I wanted to interview people that were enjoying being in their bodies, or were exploring being in their bodies, or were kind of, weren't living that kind of trans trope of, I'm desperately unhappy, I'm going to change my body, I'm going to try and look just like a real cis person, and then everything's going to be perfect. And so that's where Queer Sex came in. And at the end of Queer Sex, I was just mad. I was mad that I'd wasted so much of my life trying to avoid the word trans. And I realized at the end of Queer Sex that the only word that had ever worked for me, the only word, not woman, not femme, not this, not that, was trans. Just trans on its own, not transgender, not transsexual, not trans woman, not trans femme, just trans. I felt like trans was, you know, like there's a quote by Georgia O'Keeffe. I don't know if it's a quote that she said or that she wrote down, but, you know, she said that she wanted to paint vast landscapes, and the only way to do that was to be in a vast landscape. And trans, for me, as a word, is that vast landscape where I have endless possibilities to have whatever kind of body I want. So that's why I wrote Trans Power. I just thought, I want to go deeper into this. I just want trans. I'm not using any other word. I'm not going to perform anything anymore. I'm just going to be trans and find out what that means. And so I interviewed a whole bunch of people that I felt were also kind of veering towards doing that in one way or the other. You know, and they're right across the spectrum, really. And then the very last page of Trans Power, I started to think about the me that would have, in 1972, the first time I ever came out, I came out in the playground in 1972. And I thought about, if I'd have had the word trans, if I'd have had that sense of space then, how different my life would have been. I wouldn't have had those kind of years of kind of hellish years, really. So that's how they happened. They literally came out of the last page, and I knew exactly what I had to write next. So
that's really interesting to me, because I feel this exact same way. I mean, I'm no gender theoretician, but I live it. And Gino's, you know, their ideas are so wonderful, because it really opens up a lot of possibility for trans people who don't fit into these molds. I mean, I'm 6'1". I literally was a linebacker in high school. I'm a big person, and I don't fit into those pre-moded ideas of femininity, or honestly even masculinity. So the idea of trans being its own sort of gender category is really refreshing. It really opens up a lot of things, because it gets rid of the shame. It gets rid of the feeling that you're not enough. It gets rid of the feeling that you've done something wrong. It's not even your fault, you know?
yeah.
So thank you, Gino, for doing that. That's really amazing.
Yeah. The thing is that you said, and the thing is, in some kind of way, I do fit into that model of femininity, but actually I don't. Inside, I really don't. Inside, I don't feel anything like that. I feel like it's, so for me, it was more that thing of kind of like, trans is the word. Even though people keep saying woman, 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 trans is the word for me. That's given me the space and the authenticity to kind of feel solid and robust. And that's not, you know, and it's certainly not about shutting down any space. It's about opening it up, because we were always told that we should be ashamed of the trans bit. That the trans bit was the bit you should go off and do it. That's where people would talk about, they transitioned like a butterfly. They went away and they in a cocoon, and they came back and they were beautiful. And the trans bit was the kind of dirty, messy bit that should be hidden. And to me, that was where all the kind of magic happened. That's where the transformative is, where we step into ourselves. And for me, I stepped into myself in my transness. And you know, the surgery I had was trans affirming. It never affirmed me as a woman, or you know, for me, it didn't. It disaffirmed that kind of notion of gender. It affirmed my transness. And so for me, it was just about, oh, finally, I can breathe. I can breathe, and I don't have to be anything more than I am. It doesn't work very well on Tinder, I have to say. I don't get many dates with my whatever, but I'm not fussed anymore. So I've let that go.
And how about the last book then, Juno, Gender Explorers? How did that fit into the trilogy? Queer sex
Well,
is more of an explanatory, you know, sort of, and just giving
I,
light to.
I really feel like with Gender Explorers, I really wanted to, because I'd started to think about the 8-year-old me. I wondered what the 8-year-old me would be like now, with everything that had gone before. So I really, really wanted to. I'd been a teacher. I'd been a secondary school teacher and a primary school teacher. For about 10 years, I was a teacher, and so I kind of know that children give you, if you set the right scenario up where children feel kind of in control and safe and secure, you know, they'll tell you their truths. They'll be kind of like, they'll tell you exactly the way it is, and they're brilliant at doing that. And I really wanted to hear from them what they thought about gender. And you know, the book was called Gender Explorers because actually, when you took, I interviewed people who were 5 and they had always been themselves. There was no transition, and I felt like actually to call it, you know, transgender explorers would be wrong really, because what they were exploring were the parameters of gender, and even they themselves, even at kind of 8 or 9 or 10 or 11 or 14, would say to me, you know, I'm not sure how I want to be in a year's time. It might be like this, or it might be 5 degrees to the left, or I might be completely binary. You know, I don't know how I want to be, but I want the freedom to choose. And so for me, I wanted to capture as many voices, because at the moment there's so many people talking about trans children, so many people demonizing the parents and carers of trans children. And I wanted them to have a platform to speak in, and it's a beautiful book. I'm really, you know, it's like a beautiful cover, and it's like I feel like they're encased in a beautiful book that's doing very well and is at the top of the politics chart. And they're trans kids that have done that. You know, they are brave, honestly, rather wonderful human beings who are just literally, they get up in the morning, they dress as themselves, and they go into school and they do something that's so brave on so many levels that we couldn't even comprehend it. And they're doing that, and they're doing that for the grace of society, for the good of everyone. And you know, I feel really strongly that rather than people demonizing them, what we should be doing is saying, thank you. We should be thanking them for challenging the kind of parameters of gender that can be so damaging, that aren't always so damaging, but can be so damaging. So that's where that book comes from.
It's very timely because it's true. There is a big debate right now about whether or not transition is a trend, or declaring yourself to be trans is like a whim that that some children are hooking onto because it's something they found out about on YouTube, and that's just it's very dangerous, very dangerous.
Really dangerous, and really stupid. No one's going to go into school as an 8-year-old. I was like I said, I was a teacher, a primary and secondary teacher. No child is going to go into school look, according to the rest of the school, apparently dressed as the wrong gender, but to them the right gender. No one's going to do that for a trend. What they might do is try and dye one piece of their hair, or clip a piece of dyed hair in, or they might say something wrong to a teacher. They might do this. They might act out in some way. No one is going to say, listen, I need to do this thing, and it's really important for me. And I know that a lot of you are going to be horrible to me. Some of you will be supportive. You know, it might cause, my parents are going to struggle a bit. No one's going to do all that because it's a trend. It's just, I mean, it's beyond insulting that people would kind of say that, really.
Well, you know, in my response, whenever I hear somebody say, well, it might just be a phase, my response is, so what if it is? I mean, yeah. It's a purple hair and nail polish phase. Who gives a shit? You know what I mean? It's let it be a phase. Let them explore a little bit. Let them have a little fun, you know?
Yeah. Well, which is exactly why it's called Gender Explorers, because I agree with you completely. And I would say that to people, well, don't we want children just to explore gender?
Right.
We should own gender. You know, it shouldn't own us. We should own it and make it do what we need it to do, you know, rather than the other way around.
That's right.
So Polly, before I give you now the chance to talk more about your novel that just came out recently, I'd want to say that you know, both of you, thank you for putting out great literature, be it nonfiction or creative writing, out there, which is inspiring other people, regardless of where they are on the gender spectrum. Which I try to always say in these live streams that gender is a spectrum. So we're not always just talking about trans. We're talking about people who identify with a lot of other different tags, or without any tag. Tags that haven't been discovered yet.
Yeah, that's right.
So we have a couple questions from our viewers. We have two here. People have asked, Kylie, thank you for your question. Has COVID helped in writing more? And Shelby, thank you too for your question. Could you talk about the experience of marketing your work as a transgender author? And actually, that's one of the topics we're going to introduce after Polly talks a little bit more about her. So, but could you let us know if the writing process, well, you probably both finished your books well before the COVID situation, but I imagine you're both working on new books. So how has it been with COVID?
I'll talk. It's been great, actually. I've loved it. I mean, it's given me more dream time. You know, it's given me, I mean, the thing a writer lacks most is time. You know what I mean? We lack time. We have to make a living in a lot of ways, and we have other chores and duties, and we lack that dream time where you can literally just kind of navel gaze and go into your own imagination. And so COVID has been wonderful for that. I mean, I've gone on dream time so much I forgot to pay the bills and, you know, things like that. And it's been really great. I mean, aside, you know, obviously from the hardship that, you know, my friends in the country and all of the world has had, which is really horrible. But for writers, I suspect it's been wonderful because we now have a legitimate excuse to spend as much time as we want on dreaming up stories, which is what we love to do all the time anyway. So it's been wonderful.
I suppose for me it's been slightly different just because pardon? Sorry, I thought, did you say something, Lila? Or did you just say to talk?
No.
Okay. I suppose for me it's been slightly different, just in the sense that like I lived through the AIDS pandemic, and I lived through all of that. I remember, you know, I'm old enough to remember the very first time I'd ever heard, you know, the words the gay cancer and grid and etc. And I became positive very early on. And so for me, the pandemic was really, you know, I've never used this word before, triggering. I've never used the word triggering, but I felt so triggered by the second pandemic, and so angry. I felt like, God, I've lived through one pandemic. You can't make me go through another pandemic in my lifetime. I've lived with a virus what feels like for most of my life. I take drugs every day to keep me alive. and without them I wouldn't live. And you know, there's a part of me that just felt so angry that I felt. So I have a Patreon account, and I've been writing this thing called Isolated Words, which is really just me trying to come to kind of grips with how to live through another pandemic. You know, I was told by the government that I needed to shield because I was vulnerable from this, to get this virus, and I honestly did feel a bit like, well, I'm not sure that my body would survive 2 competing viruses. Like, one's enough, I can't do 2. And so, but then having said that, I kind of like, I then hit about midway through, I hit a really rich theme of really going very dark and very deep, and really going back to some places from the late 80s and early 90s, and really thinking about because when I was diagnosed, I didn't have a chance to think about it, because we were just told that we were going to die, so you just waited to die. And so I found a really rich theme and a way to write about that. So in that theme, to me, I then had this massive space to really sit around and read and research. I've done lots of research about the early days of the AIDS pandemic, and lots of kind of writing about it. So it's been incredibly cathartic and has fed into new writing I've done. But yeah, I found it really, I'm on my own in the mountains. So it's kind of like there was a part of me just thinking, oh no, I'm on my own in the mountains. Like, I'm HIV positive and there's another virus. And it's like, you know, I was genuinely quite scared. And so, you know, as a human being, that's one of the emotions that I'm not great with. I'm not great with being scared. You know, I'm not. So you know, it kind of, it threw me quite a lot. So that for me was, COVID didn't help. But now like everything, you have to, if you're a writer, you have to find a way of writing through stuff. You know, I write every day, even if it's that I sit down and write lists. I write every day. I don't not write. So for me, it was, that's where Isolated Words came out of, which is on Patreon. And if people want to support me, they can. I would much appreciate that, please.
And just search for Juno Roche on Patreon, right?
Yeah, it's called Isolated Words. Yeah, and it's just you know, it just documents my time through this pandemic, as somebody that had lived through another pandemic, who was angry about the last pandemic. So yeah,
I'll look up the link and I'll put it in the comments now for anybody who wants to get that. But I wanted to mention, Juno, your books they're all published, or at least some of them are published with the Jessica Kingsley publishers, right? And
yeah.
I'm familiar with that publishing house because another author who did a guest post for us on our blog, DM, she wrote a story about being a partner of a person who is transitioning, and it's really interesting. She also just came out with a book, and it was through the Jessica Kingsley publishers. Did you find yourself find it difficult to find, as a trans author writing about a trans theme, to find an outlet for your writing?
Yeah, well, in terms of finding a book, yeah. I mean, if you're writing the kind of books I'm writing, up until I'd written these books, you know, if you were writing you know, there were endless books that would say, I was born he and now I'm she, or I was Tom and now I'm Tamana, or, you know, whatever it would be like this kind of, you know, you could write that book. You could write a book that started off by saying, I'm desperately unhappy, I'm going to become beautiful, and then I'm going to, you know, but to write books that I wanted to write, which were about looking at what transgenitals are and what they mean and what they mean culturally, and, you know, that was really difficult. But it has to be said that once the first book sold well, so once Queer Sex sold well, it enabled me to then have a platform to write other books and to have the career that I've got, really. So, and that was thanks to Jessica Kingsley in the very first instance being brave enough as a publisher to allow me to publish this book, which I think would have been, I think a lot of mainstream publishers would have run from. But because they've sold well, then your life becomes different, because that's all publishing is. Publishing is hard facts. How many copies of books do you sell? end of. It's not, you know, it doesn't matter if it's brilliant content, it's just about numbers of books sold. So you always have to have one eye on that. And I think I always have. I always wanted them to be easy. I always wanted them to be readable. I didn't want them to be really too dense. I wanted to use language that people would be accessible to as many people as possible, to parents of trans kids or to whoever it was really. And I wanted them to be fun, and I wanted to have a giggle whilst I was writing them and have a cry whilst I was writing them. That, you know, I wanted them to be real. And so I'd have to say that I didn't, but I've been writing articles for a long time and talking. So I was known as a talker, and I'd worked in and around the kind of union movement as a, you know, Trans Teachers Network, the Trans Workers UK. I've been doing lots of stuff in the UK, in and around kind of political stuff before writing these books. So I did have a kind of platform, I suppose.
Okay. And Polly, in your experience, I would like for you to talk a little bit about what your novel is about, and a little bit more about why you decided to write this novel, because you were working in film before, and maybe you can also address the same issue. Did you have any obstacles along the way in terms of getting your creative work out there as a trans person?
I did. You know, I kind of have one foot in both camps. I'm a filmmaker and now a writer, a professional writer. The film work, what I do for my day job is, you know, commercials and trade show videos and internet videos and things like that. And when I came out a couple of years ago, the phone stopped ringing. It went dead. Like, clients dropped away. A lot of stuff just kind of, you know, it's weird. They don't tell you we don't like you. They just kind of stop answering the phone and stop calling you. So that was a little sort of disappointing, but refreshingly, the writing scene, the writing world has been actually very accommodating. I've had very little obstacle. They seem to be very open-minded and very accepting to, you know, various approaches to a personal expression. You know, like, I don't think there's a lot of bias, at least not in my experience, about being gay or bi or trans. So I was really lucky in that sense. I found a publisher who was actually very open to that. And in fact, some publishers are actually looking for diverse voices right now, whether they be people of color or people of different sexuality. So in a lot of ways in this literary world, it can actually be helpful because you do sort of stand apart, and it does put a little asterisk by your name, and suddenly there's like, you know, 9 white guys and you know, and so you're suddenly the one that everybody looks at. So it's been helpful, but in the film world and particularly the commercial and corporate film world, which is where I kind of made my bread and butter, it definitely hurt. It was really scary. And that was one of the real scary things about coming out. I was wrestling with this internally, and I knew it was going to, you know, like completely destroy my commercial life. It would destroy my career, basically. And it did. But you have to do what you have to do, you know, and I'm so glad I did. But at the same time, it was definitely a hurdle to overcome. So to answer your other question, The Occultist as you can see, it's a book about the early 20th century, what people commonly call the Edwardian era, which is just after Victorianism, just before World War I. So it was a lot of fun kind of researching that period. If you remember the book, The Wind in the Willows, that's an Edwardian book. It's this weird little window of the world, which was seen as kind of peaceful, very agrarian, very rural kind of world. And so I had a lot of fun writing it, and I knew it was fresh territory for what I call dark fantasy, which is sort of adjacent to horror. It's not quite fantasy, it's not quite horror. It kind of has a little bridge in between. I hope Juno is still here with us. So I had a lot of fun with that, and luckily I found a sympathetic ear who would let me, sort of tell this story to the entire world. And so I have now. Is everything okay with Juno? Is she,
Not sure yet. Hoping that she comes back in a minute. She must have lost her connection.
yeah, sometimes connections go in and out.
She really lives in the woods, so
Yeah.
but I'll write her a message to see if she can get in back in a moment. So that's interesting what you said though about your book, and so there aren't other novels at the moment who that are in the same genre, um, based in the Edwardian period. This is sort of it's a new combination, no?
Well, I mean, not necessarily. Actually, there was a real movement back when the Edwardian period was actually happening. A lot of writers like Clark Ashton Smith and Algernon Blackwood and the much maligned H.P. Lovecraft. So that's where a lot of this stuff came from. That's kind of what created the writers that eventually led to Stephen King. And of course then was the big boom of horror writing and genre fiction in particular. So it's not anything new. I'm not telling a new story. As a matter of fact, I think all stories are probably have already been told, but it is it's all in the details. It's how you tell your story, and the excuse me, it's how you tell the little details of your writing style and your characterization, and sometimes you can inject some little surprising juxtapositions that create a nice little sense of newness. But no, I think there's very little really new out there. There's a lot of really exciting writers of color coming up. That's a real place. There's a like a lot of what we term fantasy fiction. Here she comes. Is based upon Tolkien and sort of like a the middle age of European life. We've got knights and armor and we've got castles, but one of the more exciting things nowadays is that we're seeing like a fantasy that comes from sort of an African sort of point of view. There's like writers like, I don't know, I've got a little list here, like N.K. Jemisin, Tomi Adeyemi, Sophia Samatar is one. These writers are bringing in, instead of relying on like what England was like in the year 1600, we're now writing, we're now reading about what Africa was like in the year 1600. So it's a kind of an interesting trend. We're seeing more diverse voices, and obviously there's more LGBT people writing fantasy, so that's really great. Yay, Juno's back. And there's more LGBT people, there's more women writing genre fiction, so we're getting a more feminine perspective. So it's a real nice time for the flowering of this genre fiction, and it's really fun to see the women writers write horror, because their horror is different from male horror, and it's fresh and it's new and it's very interesting, and honestly sometimes it's a lot scarier too. They've got something about them. They know how to scare the hell out of you, and so it's been really gratifying to see these new voices come up.
So Polly, I was watching some comments on your one of your walls, and how you've gotten a professional review, which is going to help you get your book into libraries, and a lot of really good feedback on the novel. So
Yeah,
congratulations on that.
thank you. I worked really hard on it. It took me years. I had to learn how to write fiction with this novel, because I had written so many screenplays that I forgot how to write fiction. Screenplays, of course, are very different, way to go about it. So I had to kind of reteach myself how to write fiction. So so it feels like I'm beginning all over again, even though this is not my first novel. And but now that I'm in the zone, so to speak, I'm off to the races, and I'll be writing very much more stuff coming up soon. So I'm excited. I'm just
So
getting
what's
started, baby.
yeah, right on. So what are you working on right now? Do you have a few different projects, or one in particular that's taking most of your time?
Well, I just turned in my latest novel yesterday, as a matter of fact. Hopefully the publisher will like it. It's sadly there's been a lot of mental illness in my family, paranoid schizophrenia. It basically ruined my mother's side of the family. And my mom was affected by it, my brother was affected by it, my aunt was affected by it, and I'm probably affected by it too, but somehow I think I missed the worst effects of it. It's hereditary in a lot of ways. And so my next book kind of addresses that. It goes deep into paranoid schizophrenia because I've just got to come to terms with it, because it's been my family legacy for so long. And so it's something that, even if I don't address it with this book, I've got to address it sooner or later. So I went ahead and did that. And it was actually based upon a screenplay that I wrote a couple of years back, and it got some attention. It got optioned multiple times and got some attention from Hollywood. But as is often my story, it's one of those projects that everybody really liked, but it never went to actual production. And you can spend years in this development hell, as they call it, doing rewrites, and new producers come in and producers drop out, and then other producers come in, and finally it just kind of petered out after a couple of years. But it was still a story that needed to be told for me. So I said, okay, let's do it. Let's do it as a novel. And the real gratifying thing about books is that with film, there's always like, you have to get permission. There's such a big team, and there's so much capital involved in it, so much money, that everything moves very slowly. You have to get permission to change a comma. And with books, it's very refreshing because it's you and a piece of paper. There's no budget. So you can imagine, if you want a tidal wave, if you want a skyscraper to topple, you can do that. In a movie, you can't, because you're like, how are we going to pay for it? We have no budget for that. So it's real gratifying to now turn to fiction, because I can make a tidal wave. I can make a skyscraper topple. I can make the universe crack wide open and have the face of God looking in. So it's a lot more fun in a lot of ways. Film was very limiting. And so I'm having the time of my life. I could not be having more fun.
Well, they say anyway, the book is always better.
The book is always better. It is.
And Juno, how about you? What you mentioned before, that you were waiting for some book news.
Yeah, I know. I can't really try. I feel like I can't. I feel like there's certain things I can't really talk about. I mean, just to say that I'm working on new projects, and I'm waiting on kind of clarifying certain things. A book deal is never a fast thing. It's you have ideas. So I have just two things that I'm working on, and they're both looking very kind of hopeful. I mean, I'm never not writing a book, if that makes sense. I feel like for the last however many years, I'm always writing a book, and so yeah, I'm just waiting on some news, really. So I can't talk too much about it, because I feel like it would slightly jinx it. But I mean, suffice to say that I will have I will have books coming out, and that's all I do now, is write books. I mean, although I've written a couple of I've contributed to a few other people's books. So I've written some long essays that are coming out next year. I think an essay about aging with HIV. Well, aging as being queer and aging in a book for Penguin, and I wrote an essay about love, which is coming out in an anthology next year, or maybe later this year. I don't know when it's coming out, but so I quite like writing essays for other people, but I'm always kind of working on a book. So I don't suppose I won't have another book out. I don't think, probably not next year. I think the year after, because I think it's a long process. So once you sign a deal to write a book, you then got a year to write a book, or 6 months to a year to write a book, and then there's 6 months to produce a book, and then the book comes out. So I suppose even if I were to, for example, if I were to sign contracts this week, then my hand-in date would be this time next year, and you know, so it's a long process, but I am writing, and I'm still completely, the stuff that makes me angry and the stuff that makes me very happy is still the stuff that makes me angry, and still the stuff that makes me very happy. So I wouldn't say more of the same, but I would say that I'm always ready to kind of go deeper and to try and be more incisive about where we are and what we're doing. So yeah.
Okay, well,
And
that's
as
fine.
Polly said,
How about
I'm
then,
just
kind of
incredibly happy. So
whatever books either of you come out with, I'm sure that will be fantastic. Just by listening to both of you talk about things that you're interested in and you love, it's very clear that you're very good at what you do, and whatever form your creativity comes out in, I'm sure it will be a welcome addition
thank you.
to the world of literature and art. And so, as artists yourselves in your own mediums, and what other books are you reading at the moment, or would like to recommend to our viewers?
I honestly, that, so I'm reading the big book that I would recommend is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I don't think I've ever read a trans character been quite so beautifully written. I mean, literally, shockingly beautifully written. I mean, just the trans character just kind of slides on in and sits there, and you know, it's just so eloquently written. It's a beautiful book. It's a book about transitions. It's a book about kind of changes. I mean, it's a brilliant book. It's no wonder that it was at it was a New York Times bestseller. It was a #1 for I don't know if it still is, or so I'm reading that, and I'm also reading an anthology of the philosopher Simone Weil, who talks a lot about the kind of structural inequality and structural equality. So those are books that I would recommend. And
How about
anything, Adam?
I was just asking Polly if she has
Okay.
any recommendations.
I do. I've the the horror slash what they call weird fiction, because it doesn't necessarily fall right into horror, but it's a little unsettling. It's horror adjacent. That whole movement is having a flowering right now. There's so many amazing voices coming out. There's these small presses and indie presses, what we call, they're little presses. They're putting out some of the most amazing work right now. So some of the books I've been reading are in that world. And there's one called Bleed Through and Other Small Horrors by Scarlet Algae, which is just amazing. And these are little, what they call microfictions. They're little tiny 1-page, 2-page, 5-page stories that are just so much fun. They're scary and they're thrilling and they're dark, and they revisit Jack the Ripper in new ways, and sometimes the monster turns out to be the protagonist, and it's just really fascinating how she's able to upend these traditions and make it sort of new and readable for this day and age. And on the same token, there's another book called The Season of Loathsome Miracles by Max Stanton. It's also a book of short stories, and it is just so much fun. I mean, it's one of those books that when you finish a story, you have to like keep reading the next story because it's so much fun. You're having too much fun to just let it go. So so I'm kind of neck deep in this genre fiction and just loving it. There's just so much stuff out there to read. It's the kind of thing that when we were 11 and 12 and 13, we would find these books and read them cover to cover because they spoke to us. Now there's like hundreds of books like that out here now. So it's a really great renaissance time for this type of fiction. So we're in heaven right now.
That's great. Well, on my side, I'm reading here Trans Bodies, Trans Selves. It's a reference book. So not quite as entertaining, but for work purposes, it's a great resource for the transgender community also to connect. And it has a wonderful introduction by Jennifer Finney Boylan, who who is quite prominent in the community
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely.
And I've worked
Yeah.
with
Yeah,
the
she's my
boys.
buddy. Me and Jenny.
So before we go, we've got a couple more things to go over. The Purdy moment, judo. Can you explain to us the Pansy moment? What does that mean, first of all? And if you could explain a little bit about what that was for you.
So so at the start of this book, this book opens with me in the playground in 1972. And in 1972, if you were seen as being effeminate, whatever that means, if you were seen as being that, one of the words that you would be called would be a pansy, and it would be an insult. It would be a kind of and when the boys called me a pansy, I thought, oh, I love that name. Because I didn't hear a pansy, I heard pansy, and I thought, that's the first time I've ever been called anything that feels right to me. So it was like being named. And so I said to her, the pansy moment was me. I had like I think it was a summer or a spring term, I can't remember exactly, but I had a term in primary school at age 8 where I convinced most of the school to call me Pansy, and my teacher, my classroom teacher, who really bizarrely, and this is completely true, said that she would call me Pansy on the carpet during story time. So if I was on the carpet, I could be Pansy, and if I was off the carpet, I couldn't be. And so therefore for me, there was this kind of weird thing that if I was on the carpet, I actually existed as myself. But if I was on the carpet, I stopped existing. So I would put my hand up all the time on the carpet and ask questions about stories, and I would be excited about life. And then really bizarrely, the teacher started to use it as a punishment against me. So I was never really a naughty child, but if I was even slightly naughty, she would say, you can't be on the carpet and be called Pansy. You have to go. And it became this punishing thing. It was like it was very bizarre, and it all stopped because I kind of plucked up courage to go home and ask my dad, who was like boxing, and he liked football, and he was an East End man. He was tough, and I went home and said, my classroom teacher and I didn't say my classroom teacher, I said my teacher and the kids at school call me Pansy, and I want to be called Pansy, and I don't want to be called he anymore, and will you do that? And in no subtle way, he said, no, I won't. And so I learned that Pansy had to be put away. I had to kind of hide that. And I had maybe 20 years of absolute hell, of that kind of typical, if there's ever a lesson, I was being myself, and I was really happy, and I was really excited about life. I was excited about it being a sunny day, and about the books and I loved reading. But then I turned out to being a child who spent 10 years plus addicted to heroin and crack cocaine because I didn't want to exist anymore. And that's what happens when you stop people being themselves. They'd have nowhere else to go. They go inside themselves, and there's only so far they can go inside themselves because it just feels rotten. So they don't know where else to go. So they just kind of, in one way or another, they self-harm. And I did for 10, 15 years. And that's been the driver of everything I've done. There's been no child, no young person, if they've got the courage and the bravery to be themselves in the playground at 8, by God, we as a society are going to support them. We are not going to force them to have a life which is awful. So my Pansy moment for me has on many levels is a moment of sadness, but also a moment of it made me fight. I fought. Pansy always stayed inside me, and I fought and fought and fought. And actually, I'm not really that much of a pansy, really, on any kind of level, as it happens. But actually, she was a tough kid who loved words, who loved reading, who loved making sentences and listening to someone talking and talking, and that's me now, really. So it's that was my Pansy moment. It was a Pansy life, really. More than a moment, it was a life, because somehow she was still there. I didn't want to but I had some at least 10 very, very, very tough years where I was an addict, and you know, I did what I had to do to survive for 10 years, and somehow that young pansy inside me kept me in there and fighting and strong. And you know, it's a testament to our transness. Actually, trans people are the toughest, strongest, most robust, most capable, most nuanced people that this world is honored to have. They should be looking at us as a way forward, unless of course they're happy with Donald Trump, because that's the option. I mean, we are the antidote to the kind of to the stuff that's going wrong with the planet. So yeah, all hail Pansy.
Exactly. So, Polly, do you remember having that first moment where you had to suppress, you realized that you were going to have to suppress a big part of who you were as a child?
I, I, I do. Actually, my first trans experience was when I was 5 years old. Not kidding. I can remember it back to five. And I mean, you know, it just speaks to Juno's point that there are so many ways to be trans. Everybody is trans in their own way. I identified as a straight guy. I liked to date girls, you know, so I wasn't super feminine. I didn't, you know, it's like as I tell my friends, I didn't swish as a kid, and so it was really confusing. Like, how do you express yourself in this weird way if you don't want to date guys? You want to date girls, you know? And so it took me a long time to figure it out. Actually, into my 40s. But it was always there, just like you said, Juno. I mean, it's a fight. You know, you're fighting with shame. You're fighting with low self-esteem. You're fighting with a lot of times addiction and self-medication. You're fighting with self-harm. And
Yeah,
so, you know, and for so long I was kind of like three quarters of a person. I didn't really, you know, I wasn't able to share the fullness of myself with the world, because I'm not sure how it is in Spain and in England, but in the US, there's a lot of shame to being a guy who's feminine. You know what I mean? You're instead of a pansy, it's called a sissy. As a
yeah,
matter of
yeah,
fact, there's a book called I say Mississippi Sissy, about a guy who grew up in the South. And so there's a lot of shame, and I swallowed it and kept it a secret. And it was what I call a toxic secret for so long that it was one of those things that I couldn't talk about. Luckily, my wife was very sympathetic and knew all about it. I told her about it right away when we started dating 30 years ago. And so that wasn't a secret or anything like that. But from the rest of the world, I kind of had to keep it in a little box. And it was very hard until finally it just would not be contained anymore. And it broke out of the box. And now here I am. And I'm so thankful that I did it. You know, I've even had friends say, well, it's a little late for that, isn't it? And it's like, no, it's not late at all. I've got plenty of living left to do. And
yeah,
every moment is very valuable in our lives. And, you know, it happened when it needed to happen, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's like steam building up, the pressure built up, and finally it blew. And it was one of those things that, you know, if I had if I had felt the steam before at that point, it would have blown earlier. And it blew and it blew. And but I've been so happy since, in the sense that, you know, I have no more toxic secrets. I'm able to walk in the sunshine of planet Earth and feel the sunshine on my back as who I really am, and it's so wonderful.
yeah,
So yeah, so you know, being trans is very empowering. It's very calming. It's very soothing. I don't self-medicate anymore. I don't do all of those things. I don't have low self-esteem anymore. So I'm able to really bring to bear the fullness of myself. So it's been really wonderful, actually. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, Polly and Juno, I'd like both of you now, if you don't mind, to just share a little message with the listeners who are here now, and also those who will be watching this live stream, will be recorded and left onto YouTube. So people will continue to watch this. And if you have a takeaway message, and particularly if you want to comment to the people who are feeling a little maybe down or depressed because of the loud trans exclusionary dialogue that we're hearing these days in media and politics, and the lack of support that some people are feeling. So, do you have a message of encouragement, some words of wisdom for our listeners, Polly?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it's a really hard time right now, but it's also a wonderful time to be trans. I mean, we do have more acceptance and more self-acceptance than perhaps ever before. And I want to say a little word about Facialteam, if I can. For those who don't know, Facialteam is a maxillofacial, please correct me, Lily, if I'm wrong, but maxillofacial surgery outfit located on the coast of Spain. That what they do is they perform a procedure called FFS, facial feminization surgery, which basically it's kind of interesting. It's very innovative. They actually cut your scalp and they peel your face down and they shave your brow bone to look more like what a woman's skull looks like. There's a very different thing between men's skulls and women's skulls. And so it's very healing. And I want to particularly talk to those who want to get FFS but are struggling with the actual cost, because the cost is very high. And we actually did it. We paid for it out of our retirement. We took out of our 401ks and paid for it that way. But I just want to say, please hang in there. There's always a way. It might take years to get it done, and you might need to save up for a long time. I think there's some legislation that's coming down the way through insurance companies that may help with it, some legal remedies. But I just want to say, please hang in there, and the solution is closer than you think it is.
Thank you for that, Polly. And Juno, any final words of wisdom for our listeners?
I've always got final words of wisdom. I would say, like, I haven't had any surgery. I don't know. If I had surgery, I would hope it would affirm my transness, and that's not. I mean, I know the transformative brilliance of the clinic. By the way, I've seen it, and I've seen the impact on people. So this isn't a comment on that at all. But what I would say to people about the whole thing that's going on at the moment, be that with some people that call themselves radical feminists, or some people that write books about wizards, or whoever it is, I would give you one really simple message. I would say, turn off the internet and look in the mirror and know that you, as you are today, are good enough. In fact, if you are being yourself, you are doing one thing more than most people never do in life. If you are aiming for authenticity, you are already doing life really well. So I would say, turn away from them, look in the mirror, and really realize quite how sodding beautiful you are in all of your transness at whatever stage of this kind of process. And it's a lifelong process. I'm in my mid-50s and I started to use they, them pronouns. Don't worry for calling me she, I'm not hung up on it. But I started to use they, them pronouns in my mid-50s, because for me, it's like a process. It's like I'm a gender explorer. And, it's like, if you're doing that at whatever age you're doing it, turn away from Twitter. Twitter's really easy to turn off. And that's where they exist. They exist on Twitter. And look in the mirror and just see how wonderful you are, because you are. You're changing the planet. We're changing school buildings. We're changing language. 5 years ago, no one knew that they, them. No one was using they, them. Now they are. Now people are talking about, mixed facility, and non-binary toilets and mixed gender toilets. We're changing architecture. We are changing the world. Turn away from the people on Twitter, look in the mirror and realize your inner power. That's what I do every day. Honestly, I look in the mirror and I go, you know what? You're powerful, and your transness is what made you powerful. The you before could never have moved to the mountains on your own and learned Spanish and write books. This is all this is my transness that's done this. Trans is this a brilliant space, and it's this authentic space that you find, and it is honestly, its limit, there's power, and its ability and its creativity is limitless. We can be anything and anywhere and anyone. And that might include going to the clinic, wonderful clinic in Marbella, which is beautiful, by the way, because I've seen a film about it. So it's wonderful. So it's like, it might include that and it might not include that. Whatever it is, you are good enough today. So take the steps that you take them bravely and boldly.
My heart, that's so wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for those inspiring words, Juno. Thank you so much. And on our website, we have, can you hear me?
Yep.
The signal went a little bit. On our website, we have, right on the front, of our website, it's a campaign we have. It's called Extraordinary People. And I really believe that we're just always overwhelmed with how extraordinary the people we meet are that come to see us, all walks of life, engineers and scientists and incredible artists, and so that's why we came up with this extraordinary people campaign, and we include and we highlight some of the extraordinary people we meet this way. And we avoid, like you said, with the they and them, we try to avoid um, gender in a lot of the language that we use on the website, because we want people to feel like they can and choose where they are on the gender spectrum, and what pronouns they want
Yep.
to be used for themselves. So yeah, so thank you for those words again, Juno. And I just want to let all our listeners know that in the comments below we have links so you can find Juno's blog, and also on Amazon to buy the books, and also to Polly's website. I've put the link in the comments, and it's also in the description, pollyschattel.com. And so I just wanted to say thank you both, Polly and Juno, for joining us today. Everybody, please put some claps in the comments. Little thank you for joining us and taking the time out of your precious creative time, your flow, to talk to the people who are here today and who will come and listen to the video in the future. So, viewers, your input is important. Let us know, please, what topics you want to hear about in the future. And also, for anybody who's watching this video, please show your support now. Send messages to your legislators and MPs, tweet the powers that be, and do whatever you can to help charities like Stonewall and ClinicQ, which Juno is a patron of, and also the Women's Advance and Girls Rock AVL, which Polly is a board member of both of those nonprofits. And please help out so that these groups may continue their work supporting our trans, non-binary, intersex citizens and protect basic human rights like healthcare access and just peeing are respected. So link in the comments, and please, I'll put all the links to these organizations also in the description of the video. Stay tuned for our upcoming lives next week. We will be premiering a new documentary about Charlie Martin, who's a race car driver from the UK. And we round out the month with a new live stream with Sarah O'Connell of The Sarah O'Connell Show, and Marissa Farmer, who's a former Facialteam patient who made it over in the middle of a pandemic and border closures from Boston to Spain. So please, next week, same time, 5 p.m. for the premiere, and at the end of the month, again, 5 p.m. Spanish time. And for our live streams, don't forget to click like on this live stream, share, follow our channel, and join our private patient peer group on Facebook, and sign up for our newsletter. All the links are here. Again, now stay safe, everybody. Thank you again, Polly. Thank you, Juno, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Stay healthy because your healthcare matters, as I always
Thank
say.
you.
Over and out.